Welcome. You're watching AAU Conversations with Verdel Jones. How do you interact with your peers? How do you interact with authority? How do you learn how to be mindful of other people?
Police are known as the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system. That means before the process starts, it has to go through the police.
Welcome to AAU Teen Talk TV. You're watching Conversations with Verdel Jones. I'm your host, Verdel Jones, and being an educator at heart, I'm dedicated to sharing relevant and timely, concrete information in the hopes that you learn something that you may not have known. And in the words of Maya Angelou, when you learn, teach, and when you get, give. We have an awesome show planned for you today. Before we do that, I want to thank our sponsors, Mr. and Mrs. Roger and Shavonna Johnson. They are the executive producers of AAU Teen Talk TV, and they're also the founders of the Whitney E. Johnson Foundation. Now, AAU stands for All About Us, and that's what we're about here at AAU Teen Talk TV. For more information, you can visit their website at wejfoundation.org. So, again, we have a great show planned for you this afternoon, and we're going to be talking about educational issues or urban educational issues. And we have a great person here to talk about that topic. With education, it's always in the conversation, whether we're talking about public schools failing our students, or we're talking about the achievement gap between white and black students, or we're talking about should teachers be evaluated on test scores. It is always in the conversation. So today, we are talking to a man who is at the center of creating educational spaces that help our children grow academically and be successful, and really addressing those issues. So we have in our studio today Dr. Shango Blake, and he is the CEO of TRUSK Consultants. And he has been making a difference in education for over 20 years. Again, we're excited to have him here with us today. He's nationally known as the hip-hop principal, and Dr. Blake is a much sought-after speaker addressing issues surrounding urban education. He was a principal, and he took his school from being one of the lowest performing schools to one of the highest performing schools. And he really is devoted and dedicated to sharing this information with individuals on how they could do the same. As a result, his work has been featured in Vibe magazine, the New York Times, so he's been in a lot of major publications as well as other media outlets, including none other than Oprah Winfrey. So we are so excited to have him in the studio today. Welcome.
I want to thank you for inviting me. And I want to say to you, Verdel, I love the name of your program, AAU.
Yes.
All About Us.
Right.
And I think that that's one of the things that's important to talk about when you talk about urban education.
Okay.
It's all about us.
Right.
And what is our response to what's needed in urban education. So I look forward to this conversation.
Awesome. And I'm very excited as well. I mean, we talked off camera about a few things, and as you said, this is a conversation that could go on and on and on and on, because there's so much to digest. You're talking about students, you're talking about teachers, you're talking about administrators, parents. So there's so many levels to it. So I'm really excited to have this dialogue.
Yes.
So I want everybody to know your educational journey. What was your educational journey, and how did you get into the field of education?
I got into the field of education by chance.
Okay.
I was home one summer working at a youth program in Harlem. It was Reedland Center for Children and Families at the time.
Okay.
Now it's known as Harlem Children's Home.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
I
Okay.
worked at one of their sites and fell in love with young people, and I found out that I had a knack in a way to
Right.
engage and connect with them.
with
And
them,
ever
sure.
since then, I've been going through the ranks. Started off as a caseworker, became a teacher, assistant principal.
Okay.
I mean, guidance counselor, assistant principal,
Okay.
principal. So I've been pretty much at every stage of
level. Okay.
the system.
So what type of teacher were you?
I was a ninth grade English teacher.
English teacher. Okay. I was a former business teacher,
Okay.
guidance counselor, and now district administrator for student services, guidance and student services. So we have similar, experiences
Yes.
in reference to the job. in New York City, I know it's a little bit different. I'm a teacher or educator on Long Island, so I know there's some differences
some
within
shifts.
the
And I
within
worked in Long Island. I was in
Okay.
the Roosevelt School District
Okay.
at one point.
Okay.
That's where I first started my first administrative job as an assistant principal was in
okay.
Roosevelt,
Was in
Long Island.
Roosevelt. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So I said in the opening that you were nationally known as the hip hop principal. Why are you nationally known as the hip hop principal?
Well, two reasons. One, because I use rap in a certain way, and that's what I try to do is use it to start a dialogue with young people and connect with them. Initially, when I first started using rap, it was a way for me to break the ice. So I
Right.
would see students, and they would be in their little what they call ciphers or
Right.
circles, and they would rap.
Right.
And then I come, I'm looking all suited and proper, and then I come up and I say I can rhyme, and they say, oh, you can't rhyme.
Right,
Miss
right.
Smith." And then I would say a rhyme, and it would be blown, and I saw immediately that once I did that, I had a certain level of credibility.
Exactly.
Fast forward when I became a principal in the school in Queens, it was like you had previously said, it was one of the lowest performing schools in the district.
Right.
But when we say low performing, what does that look like?
Right.
We had everything that you would name in terms of urban blight, low teacher morale, poor community confidence, poor test scores, violence, gangs, on and on. And so I come into the school and I say, you know what, we have to change the way students view this school and create a shift in their mind.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I did was I started a uniform policy, and I made all the students wear uniforms, and I created this structure where each grade had a different color.
Okay.
Each grade had a different entrance. Each grade had a different floor, and I enforced it. And when the students came in, they were very upset with me.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure they were a little resistant
they were upset
to that.
with me. They said, "Oh, who's this man coming in here making us wear uniforms?" But what I wanted to do was say, "You're coming into a different place, a different space, with different sets of expectation."
Right.
So what happened was the students and I got into this conversation about why they have to wear uniforms, and in doing so, the students challenged me and said that what I was doing was I was taking away their individualism.
Right.
And my response to them was that I don't see individualism because you wear the same white T-shirt, you wear the same pants halfway down your behind, you wear the same scarf in your back pocket, you wear the same mean look on your face, or what they would call ice grill. So you're wearing a uniform, and why? And you're wearing a uniform that's been marketed to you by pop culture, because you see your favorite hip hop artist, and this is how they look, and so you're trying to emulate that. I said, so that's a false argument. And of course, the students said, "So what?" They didn't care what I was saying. Like, it sounds great to adults, right?
Sound
like,
really
oh
good.
man, it sounds great. But you talk to an adolescent child, they're like, okay. And so what ended up happening was one student challenged me, and he came up with a unique and original argument. And he said, if you make us wear uniforms, then we're going to be the victims of Queens, because all the other middle schools are going to feel like we're going to be the targets. And you're not going to be there to protect us when
they're
to
out,
and fro.
Right, outside of school.
Exactly. So then my response was, and I was really literally speaking on the fly because he had challenged me and I didn't really have a response.
Right.
So I said, well, you know what we're going to do? I said, we're going to make, for the purposes of school, wearing uniforms hot and not wearing uniforms unpopular.
Okay.
And we're going to make a rap song. And the students said, what? We're going to make a rap song? Ah. And so it became this energy. And so I had to figure a way how to do it. And so to make a long story short, that conversation led to us developing a hip hop song, video, took us to the Tribeca Film Festival, used as an HBO model. But not only did we get involved with the music in terms of making these videos, the students were involved in every aspect of it. They did music production. We integrated into the curriculum. So they learned, like, if you're a filmmaker, what do? You sometimes you storyboard, you sequence, you edit. When you write, you revise, you edit. So we were making comparisons between that and hip hop, and we segmented it out into every part of the curriculum, and that's how I got the monkey hip hop principle.
Hip hop principle. Yeah. So it was really getting students excited about using hip hop as the start, the spark, and then incorporating them into all aspects of what you were trying to do. And at the same time, they were learning.
Well, it became it became actually broken down into thematic units, and I want to
Okay.
shout out to the teachers that were involved in that.
Yes.
We actually had it across every content area.
Wow.
So in social studies, they were learning about the socioeconomic conditions that gave birth to hip hop. In science, they were doing Venn diagrams between the human eye and the lens of the camera.
Okay.
They had Apple Macs where they were learning how to do actual editing and shooting, and they would, when they shot, they would look at things like point of view and then compare that to essays. You know, when you're
Okay.
giving an argumentative essay, this is
Right.
your point of view. In math, they were budgeting out how much to sell the CDs for,
Right.
what was the budget that we're going to use, how to not go over cost. So they were involved in every aspect, and it became this big project-based learning program
throughout the whole school.
the whole school,
Right.
and we did it every year.
Wow. So having said that, and giving a shout out to the teachers, how did they receive that when you initially said this is something that I want to do?
Resistance. Resistance. First of all, you have to, and I speak about this in my research, but the perception of what hip hop currently was at that time,
Right.
and even to this day, was that it was misogynistic lyrics, gross materialism, violence.
Right.
So people were like,
Why
"You use
hip-hop?"
hip hop?"
Right.
Like, isn't that counter to what the aims of school is? And so, once we were, so there had to be a lot of conversation. There was resistance in the beginning, not just from teachers. There was resistance from parents.
Okay.
There was resistance from some students who said, "Well, I don't do a hip hop project in school. That's corny."
Okay.
So I mean, there was different
Right.
pockets of resistance.
Yeah.
But once we engage people in the conversation and help them understand that we're going to take the same beat. In our first song, we used the message from
Okay.
Melly Mel,
Right.
and we were like, we're bringing a new message.
Okay.
And so all we did was we replaced the lyrics with messages of student achievement, academic
Okay.
excellence, planning for your future,
Right.
pride in your school. And so we just flipped everything
Right.
and just made a message that was part of that represented the change that was happening at the school. And most hip hoppers say, what do they say? We're keeping it real.
Right.
They're rapping about their reality.
Yes.
So what we did was we changed the reality,
Right.
and then we rapped about
And
it.
you rapped about it.
Yeah.
So you were saying that some people's perception of hip hop might be negative. So my question to you, what is hip hop to you?
Well, see, I go back to the old school, right? So I look at the 4 elements. I look at emceeing.
Right.
I look at DJing. I look at what they call b-boying or breakdancing.
Right.
And I look at graffiti, the art.
Right.
So those are the 4 elements that make up the legs that make up the table hip hop. And when most people, when they think about hip hop, they think about one family member who got big, and that's
Right.
the rapper.
Right.
Right. But
Right.
but in the early days, it wasn't. The rapper was the small guy. The DJ was the person that really drove everything, and the rapper
Yes.
was just happy to be there. So when I look at hip hop, I look at those 4 elements, and then I say, how can we take those 4 elements and use
Okay.
that to make instructional connections within the classroom?
Interesting. Okay. I'm from the old school as well, so I can appreciate that for sure.
I just have to say this because like people would listen to gangster rap, right?
Right.
Now, rap is one element of hip hop.
One element.
And then
Exactly.
gangster rap is one element of
Within,
rap.
right,
And then they
yes.
would call gangster rap
Right.
hip hop.
Right.
You understand? So
Right.
even in doing the project, we went back to the beginning
Okay.
to help students understand what hip hop was in its initial genesis. It was actually a response to poverty.
Right.
It was actually anti-gang because if you know the story, they used breakdancing and battles to replace gang warfare.
Right.
So it was anti-violence, it was anti-poverty, and it was a group of people who had been totally dehumanized because of they were burning down the buildings in the Bronx, and that's where graffiti came from. See, people think, when they say graffiti, they think, somebody is being a menace by drawing on somebody's
Vandalizing, right.
Yeah, and that's true. If you're
Right.
going to go draw on somebody's house, you are.
Right.
But if
Right.
you're living in an environment where the buildings have been burnt down due to landlord scams because they were getting insurance scams, and you want to let people know that there's still a humanity that exists here, then you
Yeah.
put these beautiful art murals out to say that we are here, we exist. It was a response
Right
to
to
corruption
that.
and poverty.
Wow. I like that. That's I mean, just the history alone in that that people don't really know, let alone our children, and what it's developed into. I mean, that's probably a whole nother conversation
Yes.
that we could have, and how it's marketed to our children now and the ways that they buy into it, and it's not always a positive message, you know. So that's I love that you gave that, you know, that information about that. You know, one of the things that I'm really interested in is educating our black males. So I've done a little research on that, and part of the research was, you know, the learning styles of black males and how they are able to learn certain things. So you have some individuals with certain expectations that students can't learn, but then you look at, say, for example, Biggie Smalls, and you look at his lyrical content and the way he phrases things and the metaphors that he uses. That takes a certain skill. That takes intelligence that is unbelievable. So how did you, I'm sure there's some of that you use within your school to
Absolutely.
have students realize that this is an intelligence that is required to be able to do something like that.
You know, you say Biggie Smalls, but I also think about Nas.
Right.
Okay, Nas dropped out in the 8th grade. He never
Right.
went to high school. One of the lyrical geniuses of our
Exactly.
time.
Right.
I mean, if you listen to his music, it's personification, there's imagery, there's
Right.
similes, there's metaphors.
It's-
All the elements of standard poetry are
Exactly.
embedded in his
Right.
music, yet he dropped out.
Right.
So obviously there was something wrong with the system that they couldn't engage that bright mind. You look at
Yes.
50 Cent. Yeah, we know about the 50 Cent, the gangster and this, that, and the
Right.
third, but he's a phenomenal businessman. So
right.
if he was in a school that had a business program, he should be probably going to one of the top business schools in this country.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you would change the environment. To me, it's about what students are exposed to. So when you look at specifically young black men,
Right.
two things. I agree and I disagree with the workshop model that's used. The workshop model is a model that's used in New York City where you have a 90-minute block and students pair and share and they sit in
Okay.
circles and they
Right.
talk.
Yes.
That's fine. You should have that.
Right.
But to me, that speaks to more to females in terms of the way that they learn. Right.
Right.
So
Sharing.
talking.
talking.
Group. Guys don't
Right.
function like that.
Right.
But the moment you put young men in a competitive situation,
Oh, exactly.
they become engaged. So I always feel like really a balanced literacy program is a program that understands who's in your classroom. So
Absolutely.
you got to have both. You got to have situations where there's this communal approach, and then you got to create competition. Create a competition situation in your classroom, and you'll see the young men immediately become engaged.
Engaged. Right.
Immediately try to win.
Right.
Okay, so to me, it's that the young men are not being engaged correctly. One.
Right.
Two, if I was in school right now, I would be classified as having ADHD.
Right.
Because one, you
understand
look at
that.
these boys, you sit them in these little chairs,
Right.
Okay, and they're supposed to sit there the whole time.
They're
and
not supposed to
active.
move.
They're not supposed to move.
Right.
So the way in which the classroom is set up is very
Structure.
very restrictive.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't give them an opportunity to tap into their natural styles of learning.
Right. That kinesthetic kind of learning.
If you look at most studies, they say that black boys in particular, from birth to 3rd grade, they're the first ones to get a command of language. They're the first ones to show genius in terms of building and putting things together. They're at the top of all the testing indicators from birth to 3rd grade.
To 3rd grade.
Yeah. And then 3rd grade, they're at the
Something
bottom.
shifts.
Something shifts.
Right. What shifts?
So this is the question. What something is shifting. I know it's shifting. It's they're being put in an environment that's not natural to how they learn.
Right. Right.
So part of assessing. I always say that an assessment is not just a test.
Right.
An assessment is an assessment of who the individual is that's before you. What's their personality like? Are they
Right.
shy? Are they withdrawn? Are they outgoing? Are they aggressive? Are they inquisitive? These are all assessments
Right.
that also need to take place in order for you as a teacher
To understand.
to understand who is
Who's
in your
included.
class and how you should approach teaching them.
Right.
And so because that's not done overall, a lot of times the young
It's not.
boys lose out because they're the ones that are inquisitive, a lot of the times, and looking around and active.
Yes.
And the girls a lot of times will sit there and listen and follow through.
Right.
You know, and I remember my friend over there, Principal Patterson, we were talking. When we were growing up, some of the smartest guys, the guys that were smarter than us, dropped out of school.
Right.
And they were 10 times smarter than what we were. It was that, I find that those of us who have gone through the educational system are more indoctrinated than the ones who, when we were young, who figured out and said, this is not for me, and left.
Right.
You know, so the school has to change the way it operates if they want to really affect change with young black men.
Right. And how does, I mean, this is a big question, but how does that actually happen? How are you to professionally develop the leaders, the teachers, and then communicate that information to parents? You know, it seems like it's so, this is what we do. You know, education was developed for the industrial age. We're not in the industrial age anymore. We're in the, you know, age of information, but we still haven't changed some of the things that we do.
Absolutely.
So how does that happen? How are you able to make that change?
Well, first thing, before you can professionally develop them, you have to pick the right ones.
Right.
Right? We know the big issue right now is police brutality.
Yes.
And if I have a police officer who is inherently racist, and I develop him to be, you know, to exhibit courtesy, professionalism, and respect, I've just made a kinder inherent racist.
Right, exactly.
So we got to make sure so before we do the professional development piece, we have to pick the right people on every level, whether it's teacher, whether it's principal, whatever. And that's where I think the community comes in terms of asserting their voice in terms of what they want.
Right.
You know, and then once we have those kind of people, then it becomes easy because now, listen, when I was a principal, I had two criteria that I used to determine whether or not I would hire somebody.
Okay.
Right. One, do you love black children?
Right.
Because I was dealing with black children.
Right.
And do you love them? You know, do you love them enough to take the stuff that they're going to throw at you?
Yes.
Their attitude. You know,
all
that. Can you take it? You know, because sometimes they're going to make you go home and they're going to make you question why you exist. Do you love them enough to deal with that situation? Two, do you love the subject that you teach? Because I find that a teacher that loves the subject that they teach, it becomes contagious. If I love math, then everybody who comes in contact with me, they're going to develop a love for math because I love it.
Exactly.
So once we have those two things, then we can deal with professional development, different strategies, and what have you.
Right.
I think the big issue is that when you have certain people that work specifically in urban education who have recalcitrant attitudes, who don't want to have low expectations of children, who don't want to teach them, okay, and you can give them PD, you can spend $100 million on PD, they're still not going to change because at the root of them is a lack of belief in our children's ability to excel.
Right, exactly. It's about hiring the right people for the job, you know, and that's, you know, another thing, you know, part of what I was looking at in educating black males is a lot of times, in some instances, they don't have individuals that look like them who are teaching them.
That's a whole nother story.
A whole nother story.
Because let me tell you something. Like right now, New York City is talking about they're recruiting men of men of color to teach, right? But if you look at the suspension rate, all right, of young black men,
right,
and then you look at the disciplinary rate of black male educators, who are the ones who get fired, who are the ones who come up in the investigation, who are the ones that lose their job. They're running neck and neck with the experience that they're experiencing as an adult is what the children are experiencing as children. So don't invite black men to come into the educational system, but you really don't want to hear their voice. You really want to make them window dressing so that you can say that you have diversity.
You have diversity within your schools.
But there's no real cultural shift in terms of what's happening. Like one of the things that really, and one of the reasons why I went for getting my doctorate is I wanted to get into the policy side of things.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that frustrates me is that every time you hear people talk about the achievement gap or what's going on with students of color, they're talking about us, but not to us. where is the black educator's voice in this discussion? Don't we have a unique perspective?
Absolutely.
We come from the communities that they come
That's
from.
right.
We were once them, and now we're leading them. So don't we have a kind of different perspective about what our children need? And how come that's not being
How
brought to
come
the
that's not
public domain?
Wow. You would think that would be at the forefront of what is going on when you're talking, like you said, I love that. They're talking at us,
No,
but not to us,
exactly.
not with us, not collaboratively to make those changes that need to be made. So it's definitely an issue. How would you encourage, though, you know, more black teachers, more, you know, is it a situation where we're just not getting into the field of education, or is it, you know, what actually is going on with that? I know with, it's hard to get individuals to teach in certain areas per se, but why is it that there's I think there's a lack of, I might be wrong, but is there a lack of black educators out there?
That's an interesting question. You do have black educators out there. We do need more.
Right.
But for when I'll just use New York City as an example. 12 years of Bloomberg and Klein.
Right.
Black educators were being pushed out.
Okay.
Because
it goes back to what you were just saying about them being, you know, black males
marginalized.
Right.
Yeah. And what happened is that, and it had a lot to do with the economy. You know, there was an economic shift going on in corporate America. People were changing their jobs. So you had these programs like Teacher Fellows,
right,
Teach for America, Leadership Academy, where people were trying to shift out of executive positions. And so you were getting an influx of people from the Midwest coming into these inner cities, teaching our children. And what happened was it was a cultural clash going on in the classroom. So that's one problem.
Interesting.
You know, the same, if we can have incentive programs that recruit, and I know that the people that are coming in don't look like us, you know, the majority of them, then why can't we have a relationship with historically black colleges?
HBCUs, absolutely.
And create incentive programs for these young students just graduating. They need jobs, you know, to come and teach in the inner cities for 2 or 3 years, and they might find out that they really love it, and they'll get turned on to it like I did. So you know, if we're really going to be serious about the situation, there's all kinds of ways to recruit them. But then once we get them, we have to validate their perspective, validate their experience, and allow them to be partners in the process.
Right.
You know. Right. That's part of the problem.
That's part of the problem.
Because they'll hire, let me just tell you, for a black male principal, most of us, when we get the schools that are rough ones. Right. So at the very beginning of our career, we're entering into a situation where we're going to have conflict. Yeah. Because when you come into a school that's dysfunctional, you're faced with one or two decisions. One, you can play along, play it safe.
Play nice.
Okay, at the expense of our children.
Right.
Or two, you can make changes at the expense of your career.
Right.
All right? And so it's just interesting when you look at the challenges, the institutional challenges that people of anybody, whether black or white, face when they have these low-performing schools. Because when you are asking them, when you have to come in and make change, you have to hold the people accountable.
You have to hold them accountable.
You have to teach differently.
That's right.
You have to raise the standards, the expectations. And so what they do is they invite us in. You know what they invite us in as, in terms of principals? As high-paid security guards. Right. Oh, get the children straight.
That's right.
As if the children are animals. And they're not animals.
Right.
They're children.
Exactly.
And so when you come in and you bring order, oh, great, you got the order. But when you start touching on curriculum, instruction, innovative programming, teacher expectation, whoa.
What are you doing?
What are you doing?
I'm being an educational leader.
Yeah. Now you're doing too much.
Right, you're doing too much.
And you actually think you know something. So not only is there a low expectation of children, but there's a low expectation of the leaders who lead the children.
Wow. We have a few minutes left before we wrap up. You have a company. Yes. TRUSK Consultants. That's right. What is that about? And then after you let us know about that, can you tell people how they can get in touch with you or find out what you're up to? Okay, so it's called True SK Consultants. True SK and it's TRU it's an acronym. Right. And it means teaching, reading uniquely to reverse underperformance.
The
Okay.
SK is like, it's the hip hop play, like school, like
Oh,
it's short
got
for
it.
school.
Okay,
So
true
SK.
school. Got it.
Yeah, so not old school, not new school, but true school.
Okay.
And
Oh, I
it's
like that.
exactly what it's what we do at our company is that we work with schools. Specifically, our focus is inner city schools,
Okay.
urban schools, urban school leaders. Everything
Okay.
from professional development to creating youth engagement programs to leadership training. We provide those services to schools that are looking for different approaches and different strategies. And one of the things that we do that makes us unique is that we don't have a one-size-fit-all approach to school reform.
So it's very individual.
It's individualized to that particular school, that school culture, to the vision of that school leader and what they want to see, and then we work together as partners to try to come up with working strategies to bring about sustainable change.
Awesome. And can you tell people how they can reach out to you or find out what you're up to?
Thank you. You can go to www.trueskconsultants.com, and it's www.tru/sk/consultants.com.
So I want to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Real engaging conversation. We have a segment 2 that we're going to do, so I'm excited
great.
for that as well. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. And please, if you're watching online, stay tuned for segment 2. Welcome. You're watching AAU Conversations with Verdel Jones. How do you interact with your peers? How do you interact with authority? How do you learn how to be mindful of other people?
Police are known as the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system. That means before the process starts, it has to go through the
Welcome to AAU Teen Talk TV. You're watching Conversations with Verdel Jones, and I'm your host, Verdel Jones. Being an educator at heart, I'm dedicated to sharing relevant, timely, and concrete information in the hopes that you learn something you may not have known. And remember, in the words of Maya Angelou, when you learn, teach, and when you get, give. We have an awesome show planned for you today. Before we get into that, I want to thank our sponsors, Mr. and Mrs. Roger and Shavonna Johnson. They are the executive producers of AAU Teen Talk TV, and they're also the founders of the Whitney E. Johnson Foundation. AAU stands for All About Us, and that's what we're about here on AAU Teen Talk TV. For more information, you can visit their website at wejfoundation.org. And for more information on your hosts, me, Verdel Jones, you can visit my website. It's deliteach.com, DELITEACH.com. So we have an awesome show plan. We had a segment 1, and we were talking to Dr. Shango Blake, and we're going to pick up this conversation. But we're going to focus on instructional approaches that work. So I just wanted to throw out a couple of statistics. There was a study done by the Schott Foundation of Public Education, and in 2013, high school graduation rates for black males was 59% compared to 80% for white males. Only 16% of black males have a college degree compared to 32% in white males. 37.1% of blacks represent our nationwide prison population. And black students are suspended or expelled 3 times more than their white counterparts. That was just some pieces of information that was taken from this study. You can find more information, again, those were just a couple of data points, at blackboysreport.org, and you can check out the full study or the full research on that. You know, all these factors or all those statistics that I kind of mentioned, they really have a great impact on our community, from underemployment to unemployment to low incomes, you know, and it really is, it's not a community as far as isolated issue, it's a national issue. You know, it's something that really needs to be addressed, and really, you know, I think, you know, for lack of a better phrase, and maybe this is the right way to call it, it's a crisis. It's something that really needs to be addressed. And so I am excited to introduce Dr. Shango Blake. He's nationally known as the hip-hop principal. He has over 20 years of experience in education. And his collective and creative approach to working with all stakeholders results in providing students with quality education. You know, his work has caught the attention of Vibe magazine, New York Times. He has also been focused on, you know, Oprah Winfrey, you know, has also interviewed this gentleman. So I'm so excited to welcome him to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. You know, all those statistics that I had mentioned, you know, we know though there are issues within, you know, within the black community with students of color and the achievement gap. And we talked a little bit about that before. But what is the difference between an urban school and an affluent school? I mean, right off the bat, I would say it would be money. But what are some other factors? Like, can you just throw money at an issue like this, or are there more things involved that an affluent school may have so they can, you know, their students achieve more, let's say, as opposed to an urban school?
Well, urban schools, one is location. Urban schools tend to be in the inner city, and so and then 2 is population. The population that urban schools tend to serve are predominantly black and Latino, while in suburban, affluent schools use in the suburbs and predominantly white students. And yeah, money is an issue. Matter of fact, there was a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Colesville, in the early 90s, in the 60s, he wrote a book called Death at an Early Age.
Okay.
And it's a book everybody should read. It was talking about segregation at the time and the effects of segregation having on the lives of these children who were in these segregated schools, and in terms of not having equal access to resource.
Right.
Then he followed up with a book in 1991 called Savage Inequalities, and it looked at the funding formula of schools per pupil, you know, per pupil student, right?
Right.
And the spending, and it was, you know, he looked at how there was a major gap in terms of the resources that were being driven towards inner city urban schools as opposed to suburban schools, and in actuality, based upon his research in his book, there became this campaign in New York, in particular, in New York State, campaign for fiscal equity, and where there were parents of color suing, saying that there's not enough resources being dedicated to the 5 major school districts, which was New York City, Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, and so they were looking at, you know, funding and funding formulas, and during that time, Governor Pataki initially had stated that an 8th grade education was sufficient. Okay, and
Right.
then had to
Not for his children, though.
it
right?
didn't have to walk that back. So
Right.
we do know that funding is also, a
Yeah.
major issue that needs to be addressed. However, it's not just funding.
It's not just funding.
And throwing money at the problem is not going to solve the problem.
Yes.
It's also awareness. It's also involvement. It's also attitude. And I'm speaking specifically
Right.
to parents of color. When you go to some of these other districts, there's a greater level of awareness. They understand how politics plays into the decision making in terms of what
Okay.
happens and what resources their children get, and they're involved. Okay,
Right.
and they have an attitude of involvement, not just in terms of raising issues when they come up, but also
Right.
actively supporting the schools that their children are
More
in.
proactive as
More
opposed to
proactive,
reactive.
yeah.
Right.
There's certain schools districts you go in, and the parents ask the teachers, what is your wish list?
Right.
What is your wish list? What supplies do you need? And they
Right.
supply.
And they give it to you.
And part of that is a money thing.
It is,
because,
right.
because it's a resource thing. But there's always other ways to get involved. When the school that I was at in Queens, we had a group of parents that were actively involved,
Right.
and they found other ways to be involved in the school. So I think a lot of it has to do with re-educating our parents.
Yeah.
And it's a two-pronged problem. One is we have to reach out to the parents.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't like when I hear principals say,
There's no parent involvement.
parents don't come.
They don't care.
Well, what did you do to get them
Right.
to come?
Yeah.
All right? Well, how far are you willing to go?
Yeah.
When I was a principal, I went to churches. I made home visits. I
Right.
was out in the community, so they saw me. So then when I invited them to come to the school, I wasn't a stranger
Right.
calling.
They felt comfortable.
They felt
They
comfortable.
felt welcome.
Exactly.
Right.
And you have to think about some of these parents. Okay, so we're in 2016. Okay, we just let's not be politically correct here. We have are now the post crack era epidemic,
Yes.
and we dealt with years of grandparents raising grandchildren,
Right.
parents being
Yep.
strung out on drugs based
Yes.
upon that epidemic. So when you and then people made decisions in their young life where they didn't finish school.
Right.
So it's kind of scary
Yeah.
for some parents in these urban areas to go to a school building
Yeah.
when that school building represents for them a dream deferred,
Right.
right? And then sitting in meetings talking about their children with people who are not speaking in layman's terms.
Yeah.
So you go to a special
Throwing out
education
all these
meeting and
acronyms
say your
and-
child is ADHD.
Right.
I think I heard Minister Farrakhan say, you go to these meetings. And they say your child got ADD, and the parents saying, "You mean he can add? He
Right.
can add,
Right.
So they said, so you're using language that they're
Right.
not familiar
Then
with. So we have to deal with
Right.
cultural competency. We have to shift the
Absolutely.
discussion,
Right.
and begin to be
So
able to
true.
put it in layman's terms and make
So
them
they can-
feel part of the process and as partners in the process. I do not believe in parent involvement. Because parent involvement simply means I'm going to involve you with an agenda that I already have.
Okay.
I believe in parent partnerships.
Partnerships.
Meaning that you have a point of view, I have a point of view. We're going to argue about it. We're going to fight about it, but we're going to come to
We're
some
going to get
consensus.
to this, right.
And in that
exactly.
sense, the children always win.
Yeah, and with it's funny, it just reminds me of a story that we went to a parent-teacher conference, my husband and myself, and there was an issue with the teacher. And the teacher's throwing out all these words, terms, they try to trick you. She didn't know that I was an educator and had been an educator for, about 10, 12 years. And he said to me, I'm so happy that you were here to decipher everything that was being said.
Yes.
Because that is exactly what happens. And if our parents are not aware of all of these terms, or we're not willing to, like you said, break it down in layman's terms, how are they going to know? And then you think they're disinterested, but they just don't know.
And then the educators have to get over their fear.
Right.
Because we say we want parent involvement,
but do we?
really? Like, do you? Because the
Right,
parents
right,
are the
exactly.
one group that is not beholden to anybody. So, do you really want that independent voice that's going to push up on you and ask you questions
Right.
that are going to force you to be more effective in your approach? So, we say we want it, but do we really want it? Because it means that we have to now really be open to hearing another perspective.
That's right.
And some of us are not as open as we say we are.
And that's one thing I always tell parents. You need to make sure that your child's teacher knows who you are. You have to approach them. You have to talk to them. If you don't know something, you have to ask them so they can explain it. Because I think there is a sense with teachers, if, oh, I know this parent is going to, is going to be on me if I don't do X, Y, and Z.
Exactly.
That's good for the
Makes,
parent.
and it's also good for the educator because
That's right.
what it does, it makes you sharper.
It steps up their game.
I tell you, I had parents. It wasn't the parents who would come in and complain and question me and be critical of me made me more effective.
Absolutely.
Because I would say,
That's
well,
right.
I'm going to see Miss Jackson, and I know
right.
she's coming with that. I better be on point.
Yeah.
And then I tell the teacher, Miss Jackson's coming. You better be on point because we don't want to deal with Miss Jackson. So, but what happens
It's so
is it
true.
makes
It's so
us
true.
more accountable and makes us
Right.
more effective. And if you're truly an educator, and if you're an educational leader,
Right.
a leader is a servant. So you shouldn't be offended when people come and they beat up on you a little bit.
Right.
That's part of the job.
That's part of the job. Absolutely. That's part of the job.
Comes with the territory.
It does. So let's just talk, stay with the parents for a minute. How does a parent know what a quality education looks like? What are some signs? What can they see when they walk into their child's school to let them know that learning is actually happening here and it's effective and it's quality education?
Well, before they even walk into the school, what they should do is stand outside of the school and watch how the children approach the school.
Okay.
Do they look like there's an urgency to get into the building? Or they're taking their time and they're dragging their feet?
Right.
Is the principal a person that's in the office all day? Do you see the principal outside, around the building, in the community? When you walk in the building, do you feel the principal's presence throughout the building?
Right.
Are the teachers friendly? Are the teachers actively engaging children? There's certain things that you don't even have to walk into a classroom.
Right.
They can walk through the halls, they can see, wait a minute, I noticed that all the children are rushing to get to this teacher's class, but dragging their feet to get to this other teacher's
right.
class, and it's the same group of children.
Right.
So those are just like basic
Right.
things that they can look at that will tell you something about the environment.
Yeah.
Okay, are parents welcome? Is there a place in the building for parents, where they can coalesce?
Okay.
Are parents invited to come into the classroom
Into the
to see
classrooms, right.
instruction in real time? Is the school actively communicating with them, giving them information about the curriculum, explaining it to them in a way that makes
break it
sense?
down for them, right.
And is their input welcome? So like for the school that I was at, parents were in there all day, every day. They were
Right.
in classes. They walked the building. They checked in on their children, but they got a chance to see what was happening in those classrooms. I think the school that kind of shuns parents and don't want the parents to see what's going on, that should raise a red flag, right?
Red flag.
But then the
Absolutely.
parents also have to do their due diligence in terms of educating themselves about the curriculum. Most schools have something called curriculum night.
Right.
Parents
Yes.
should go so they can find out these are the teaching strategies. This is the pacing calendar. This is what we're doing in terms of the scope and sequence, which is like
Right.
the plans for the year. And then these are the standards that we're trying to meet. These are the skills that we're trying to address.
Right.
Parents should become informed. And let me say this, because I know somebody's probably going to say, but I got 2 jobs.
Right.
Okay, and I got to put food on the table, and
Right.
I'm stretched to the max already. So how am I gonna get to
I
the
don't have
school
time.
to deal with what's happening? That's when we now, I'm not talking about an individual parent, collectively have to go back to our communal roots.
Yeah.
Maybe you can't make the meeting, but maybe if through unity you have a friend who has more time than you have.
Right.
And y'all can partner up, and that parent can get the information and share that information with you, or be that point person for you and your child, or be that
Right.
person that you can speak to gather information about what's happening. See, we have to get back to, we use it as a cliche. We use the
Right.
village
Yeah.
as a cliche, but we have to really
Put it in
put it in
action.
action
Yeah.
so that, maybe you can't make it, but hey, I can. And so I'm not going to just look out for my child and be an
Right.
individual. I'm going to look out for my child and these 5 children in my neighborhood, and I'm going to be the ambassador of information for everybody.
I love that. That's a great approach, and I think we need to be the supporters in that. Because people might not even think of that as a thing to do. So I think that's a great way to approach getting more parents that information that they need from someone who is
They trust, who's credible.
Exactly. So I want to focus a little bit on your research on transformational leadership and educational reform. I was looking through some of it, and I know in part of it there was a sample that you used, and so we're talking about an urban environment with about 98% minority students within that sample, and you took a 3-step approach to improving schools. There was teaching, innovation, motivation, and excellence.
Yes.
That was time. I did my little homework.
You did your research.
I did my research. The Hip Hop Project.
Yes.
And then parents empowering students today.
Yes.
So explain a little bit what that actually means and how you were able to implement that within your school. And the research behind it is you were successful with your students in your school. So what is that 3-step approach?
Well, the time piece, right, was the model of the school, but it was also the benchmark that we used to evaluate our performance. So time teaching, was there effective teaching going on in the school? Innovation, were we using innovative instructional approaches to connecting with young people and bringing the curriculum? Motivation, were the students motivated? Were the teachers motivated? Were the teachers motivating the students? And of course, excellence. Were we striving for excellence in every aspect of what we were doing? So the time model became the not just the benchmark, but it also became the call to action. Okay, because what we were saying was that the time is now. And we were trying to say is it's time to change what we're doing, and time means teaching, innovation, motivation, and excellence. And that was closely linked to the Hip Hop Project, because the first song that we came up with the students was, "What time is it? The time is now. It's time to shine." And the students would sing the song. So we use hip hop to get the students to buy into the change, to remember what the change is or was, and so that's how the teachers were able to able to engage students in terms of not just the curriculum, but in terms of developing project-based learning and what have you. So that was time. And then the Hip Hop Project was what I spoke about earlier in terms of taking that message of time and breaking it down into all the academic strands, whether it be literacy, math, science, social studies, art, public speaking, taking that model and just breaking it into different projects and breaking it into different pieces and unpacking it. And so when you went to that school, you could not ask anybody what time is it and really get someone to tell you the time. Because the model was that strong. So you would say, "What time is it?" And the student, parent, teacher would go, "Time is now. It's time to shine." So it became embedded and infused into the culture. So what that represented was a cultural shift. A school that's low morale, low community confidence, gangs, violence. Now we have student uniforms, pre-nursing program, pre-engineering program, doing all of these different things in terms of improving the curriculum. There's a budding school pride. So it was like, what time is it? The time is now. But that time is now meant that we're changing, but there's an urgency for change. We're not changing tomorrow. We're not waiting 4 years from now. Time is now to make this happen. And then lastly, the pest.
The
pest. Shout out to the pest. Parents empowering students today. What that meant was, in order for your child to be successful tomorrow, you got to get on their nerves today. You got to check their work. You got to check who their friends are. You got to ask them questions. And the way that happened was that when I first got to the school, students were bringing parents to the school to tell me off. Right? So they would bring, "I'm going to get my mama on you, Mr. I'm like, what is this? What is this? So after the parents would come in and they'd be upset, I'd say to the student, "I need you to wait outside." And then I would talk to the parents. And I would say, "Look, I need your help." And so some of my most challenging parents, or the ones who challenged me the most, I challenged them back and said, "Well, if you think you can help me do something better, help me." And so then so that's when we came up with the concept PEST.
Okay.
And we ended up creating, it was more than just a acronym, it became the basis for a school community partnership, because the PEST ended up creating a safety zone around my school, mostly men, in the mornings and the afternoons, answering that young man's question in the beginning who said, you're going to make us feel unsafe if we have to wear uniforms. We had a 5-block safety radius. And it actually would go out further. They knew all the homeowners, they knew the merchants, they knew the local precinct.
Wow.
And so they would watch the students as they moved through the neighborhood. They had pest jackets, they had bikes, they drove around in cars, they had walkie-talkies, they communicated with my administrative team, and we ended up protecting our children and developing a better relationship with minority urban youth and the police, because the police, rather than taking them to the precinct, would say, oh, that's a kid from that school. And they would say, those pests, we'll bring them to the pests because we know the pests will bring them to the principal.
Okay.
So not only were they there in the mornings and the afternoons, but they were in the school during the day, and we ended up developing a parent resource center. So now we had a real school community partnership, okay, and they had voice. And it's so funny because I just tell the parents, I say, you know, we used to argue all the time. And this is what I mean about partnerships, about what was good for children. And sometimes I would win the argument, and sometimes I would lose the argument, but the children never lost because we were arguing about better ways in which to help our children
how to help them
excel.
It is a partnership. You're working for the same thing. It's the same goal. Parents want to see their students, their children do well, and you want the same for them. I think getting them on board with that and having them understand, I'm here to help.
And when you look at transformational leadership, so there's two kinds of leadership that are present in most organizations. One is transactional, where you manage by expectation.
Okay.
Right. You lead through the system of reward and sanction. You do what I like, you get a reward. You do what I don't like, you get a sanction. And you can only get so far with that. And there's nothing wrong with it. Neither one are negative. Sometimes you need a strong transactional foundation for you to build a transformational approach, right? But transformational, you're more like a coach, a mentor. The transformational leader is concerned about each individual follower. They stimulate the follower to move beyond where they thought they could go. And they function in the realm of idealized influence. So they influence based upon ideals. In order to be that kind of leader, you have to be able to, you have to humble yourself. Because you cannot deal with parents and the community. I can't walk around Dr. Blake, so, you know, that's what I say. You know, it's not going to work.
It's not going to
They're going to reject you.
Exactly.
So the way that you institute real change is that you humble yourself to have the discussion. And and even with the discussion with the students in the uniform, look what came out of that conversation. See, but that would have never happened if, as the school leader, I wasn't willing to have the conversation. I could have just said, "Yep, this is what we do. Y'all wear uniforms, and that's it."
Right.
You know, but it was like a conversation happened, and they got a chance to express what their point of view was. And so, out of that dialogue, this whole hip hop project came about.
Right. Wow. Now, so being in New York City schools and being able to create this type of school, how much, if, say, for example, you have someone else as a principal in a New York City school and they want to implement some of the things that you did that were successful, how easy is it for someone to make that leap within a system that's in place?
Well, that's a great question. It's also a loaded question.
I know.
But listen, here's the thing. This change, there's two forms of change, right? Or two faces of change.
Right.
There's the technical aspect of change and then the human dynamic of change. The technical aspect is rather easy, but the human dynamic is treacherous. Because when people, when they cannot attack your effectiveness, they go after your character. They try to tear that person down, not because of who the person is, but because they don't want to change, right? Because when you have dysfunction, as a result of dysfunction, people develop informal pockets of power, right? So if there's a dysfunction and then I'm solving issues in that dysfunction, then I grab power in that process. But when someone comes along and says, okay, in order for us to actually create sustainable change, that's for the good of the whole, we're going to have to now take some of that power back and put it where it belongs, and then that's where the treachery comes in. Right? And this is what, I mean, we can use President Obama as an example of this, right? Everybody loved President Obama when he was talking about change in the abstract. You know, yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Change the world. You know, everybody loved it. But when he started dealing with concrete change, now we need this kind of medical insurance policy. We need this, and we need this kind of immigration policy. Then it was like he became demonized. And so that same concept happens often in the public school. So like I said earlier, you're taking a risk. Right. Because when you start really making change, you're going to run up against people who are benefiting from the status quo. You talked about earlier in this piece about the school to prison pipeline. Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of beneficiaries with that system.
Yeah, and so if you start really instituting change, then you know that there's going to be a reversal of this school to prison pipeline. You know, there's going to be people who are going to be put out of business.
Right.
Right? Because we know that the prisons are privatized. Mm-hmm. We know that that prisons have been traded on the NASDAQ. We know that that there are prisoners in prison making products for Fortune 500 companies and being professionally developed to do jobs inside the prison, and then when they get out of prison, they cannot work for the same company that they was working for in prison. So there's a whole system. And school, and I used to be a little naive. I used to say to myself, I don't understand why school it becomes such a political thing. But when you really look at it, you're looking at determining who's going to be the future doctors, lawyers, engineers, physicians, who's going to be the future teachers, counselors, and then who's going to be the future people who work in McDonald's or the service industry, and then who's going to be the future prisoners.
Right.
So there's an economy built on this.
On that.
And when you come in and you take the group that is geared towards being either the future McDonald's workers or the prisoners, and say, no, you're going to be the future physicians and engineers, then what you're doing is you're upsetting
that.
The
You're
order.
interrupting.
You're interrupting that.
Absolutely.
Okay,
You're
so I don't believe that this happens. My belief is that this is not by accident.
No.
I believe that this is done by design. And anybody who's working in education, making that change, don't be naive. Understand you're salmon swimming upstream and get ready for the attack.
Right.
Prepare yourself for the attack and go do the work anyway.
Yeah, because it's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
I often wonder, you have these dynamic administrators who can come in and change things, and then they're gone because they're driven out.
Oh, yeah.
Because they want to make that change. They want to help our children. And you think everybody's on that same page, but in a lot of instances they're not.
You have the alternative. You have a lot of educators who are brilliant.
Right.
Bright. Know what's needed to make the change and positively impact our children, but they're frozen by fear.
Yeah.
Because they have seen what happens to others who have done that.
Who've done it.
And so they're afraid to move. And what happens is they look incompetent. But if you really had a conversation with them, they know the answers to the problem, but they're afraid to make the change because they don't want to receive the consequences like those of us who have made those kind of changes.
Yeah. It's very risky. You know, when you're talking a stable, steady job, then you have to look at outside things that they have to really be concerned of, and it's a risk for them, to take. We have a few more minutes left. You are the founder of and CEO of True SK Counseling. What type of service? Consulting. Yeah. Sorry, I said counseling.
Yeah, because that's who you are by nature.
That's who I am by nature. What services do you provide, and how can people, get in touch with you or find out what's going on?
Okay. Well, you can get in touch with us by going to trueskconsultants.com. That's TRU-SK-consultants.com. We provide professional development for teachers. We do help students build youth engagement strategies. One of the things that we do is we help with how you can reduce your suspension rate, bring about restorative justice programs in your school. We train new principals who are challenged because they're in an urban school environment and they know where to begin. Okay, so those are the kind of things that we do. But the unique part of what we do is that we tailor our approach to what the principal and that school community wants to see in a way of changing the culture of their school. So we're not a one-size-fits-all kind of a program. We're the type of program that really sits with leadership and develop partnerships. You know, I go into schools, you think I'm part of the faculty because I roll my sleeves and I get involved.
And you get involved.
I don't sit there and just, hey, you should do this. Hey,
right.
You should do that. Like, you know, people paying all this money for somebody to tell them, hey, you should do it. They can't read a book to do that. They need some people to help brainstorm and help them think outside of the box and then roll their sleeves and help them do the heavy lifting.
The logistics is a tough part of a lot of it, really putting it in action. So I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. Great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I just, you know, we could talk about education all day long.
All day.
There's so many levels and so many aspects of it. So I just want to thank you for joining us. And come back whenever you'd like, because I enjoyed our conversation so much.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for having me, and I will take you up on that offer.
Okay.
This was a very, to me, a productive interview. And like I said, AAU, I love the name. All about us.
All about us.
All about us.
So I want to thank everybody for watching, and have a good night.